Global, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-technic shamanism.
Synchro-mystic.
Transformation of consciousness.
Such an incredible connection to this medicine and this culture.
Mystical.
That we can form a larger community that can make the invisible visible.
We're going to come into new expressions of
Where did psychedelics come from?
The sacred mirrors were based on a psychedelic experience.
Thank you, Palenque Norte.
Welcome to Palenque Norte. For our next talk, we have the great pleasure of having John Allen and Tango Parrish Snyder here with us. John is the creator of the Biosphere 2 project, this fascinating self-contained ecological environment. And he'll talk to you a little more about that. And Tango is the publisher of Synergetic Press, and I believe she's currently working on a Albert Hoffman biography, yes? Awesome. So it's a great pleasure to have them here with us today, and thank you all for coming.
Hi. So how many of you know a little bit about, just going to take a few moments before John starts to speak, just to give you a little bit of a background about my experience working with publishing books on the Biosphere. Back in 1983, I was commissioned to publish a book called the Biosphere Catalog. I don't believe that in those days, Biosphere was a household term. I remember having to spell it on the telephone every time I said it. And I remember, this is a 1984 edition of the Biosphere Catalog, the first approach to the study of the Earth's biosphere. What do you study in the Earth's biosphere? First of all, I didn't even know what a biosphere was myself. So John, the scientific editor, gave me an outline. The outline included biomes, atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere, microbes, soils, plants, animals, evolution, cultures, commodity production, cities, energy, transportation, communication, space biospheres, cosmic particles in Earth's radioactivity, genetics and cloning, analytics, biospheric organizations, tours, travels and adventures, information, and an appendix. This is all before the internet. This is way before the internet. And I had to find somebody that was a key person in each of those areas to write about that subject matter and to give us an introduction to what the role was of that area in the biosphere. How did it support the biosphere? So when I called the bookstores after publishing this, they all asked me where should they put it? In the gardening section? Well, I then went on, and meanwhile, Biosphere 2 was being in its fertilization mode. It was being designed in its early stages. In 1984, it began, and I came across a man who was a Russian that I was introduced to, also by John, called Vernadsky, Vladimir Vernadsky, who wrote the first theory of the biosphere in 1929. And I published the first English translation of that in its very abridged form called The Biosphere. And I went on to learn more about the Russian legacy. I then became involved in Biosphere 2 project, which was the largest laboratory for global ecology ever built. And how many people have heard about Biosphere 2? Wow, good. There's only a few young people here today. It's still there in Arizona. It really was a landmark experiment in self-sustainability and human life support, with the endeavor to both develop tools for, first of all, to test the Vernadsky hypothesis that there is a self-supporting evolutionary system, living system on the planet Earth called a biosphere, and including all of those levels. So we went on to that for that endeavor for about 10 years and published a number of different books on biospherics. And that leads me to John being one of the pioneers of biosphere science. After Vernadsky, there was also a gentleman called Claire Folsom who built the first small 1-liter closed systems in Hawaii, and he was involved with the project. We worked with about 250 scientists from around the world to create this incredible experiment. And obviously there'll be more, you can learn more about all that. I won't go into all that right now. I'd like John to share some of his experiences and all of his visions of what led him to conceive of such a bold experiment. I have recently published the unabridged version of the Vernadsky theory of the biosphere, which was quite a large work that he worked on up until his death in 1944. And so working with the Russians was an incredible experience. They're a great adventurous group of scientists and explorers in the world of biospherics, and Vernadsky's legacy continues to be developed today. And John has many, many, many other worlds to take us through today, and thank you.
All right. And biosphere. Biosphere. Ah, yeah, thank you. There's 4 words that help understand the biosphere. That's huge, dynamic, evolving, and old. The biosphere is at once old and forever new. It's over 4 billion years old. It's perhaps even older than Earth, because we have a 15 billion year universe. So there would be other suns and planets that could have had a 5 billion year head start on Earth. Now the other thing is, that's the old. Now it's also evolving. For example, the biosphere started out with the non-nucleated bacteria. Bacteria didn't even have a nucleus. Then it built a second kingdom, a nucleated bacteria. That took about 2 billion years. Then came animals, plants, and fungi, all more or less at once. And the fungi clean up the mess that's left behind by the animals and the plants and recycle it. And the 6th kingdom came only about 40,000 years ago. That was us, thinking humans. Physiologically, humans may have arrived 200,000 years ago, but the first sign of actual intelligence carrying out a project is 40,000 years ago in the great cave paintings. So, yes, it's old. Now, it's also evolving. It's one thing, like human beings, we get old, but generally we start deteriorating. But the biosphere, in fact, the older it gets, so far, the more ingenious it becomes, the more strange new evolutionary occurrences. They had, so this evolving is not just that there's involved the 2 bacterias, the plants, animals, and fungi, and humans, but it keeps involving new kinds of humans, new kinds of plants, new kinds of fungi. For example, in humans, now when I first studied anthropology, which was a long time ago, they had basically Neanderthal and 1 or 2 other people. Now we've discovered maybe 7 proto-species of our present species, the Homo sapiens sapiens. Probably should have been Homo foolish foolish instead of wise wise. So this evolution still continues. For example, let me throw out a couple of heretical things. How many races are there on the planet Earth? Are there more than 1 species of hominid? There are many people who think there are, who think they've actually seen such events. This by no means is accepted, but it's certainly in the sphere of possibilities. the evolutionary genetic mutations and so forth have not stopped, it's rather foolish to think that we represent the final ultimate thing that evolution could do on planet Earth. And many people think that we're already out-evolved. Then it's dynamic. The biosphere, people always say, oh, well, that's plants and animals. That's not dynamic like an automobile. In fact, an automobile is not dynamic like a plant and an animal. Maybe you get a new model Ford or a new model Chevrolet, but you don't get suddenly a whole new species. So it's extremely dynamic. The changes can take place rapidly. A small change in rainfall in a whole district becomes a desert. There was a rainforest. In rain it comes, a rainforest can appear. There's huge dynamics. So huge is the fourth one. The biosphere is so huge that nobody has mapped it. There's unknown species. Well, bacteria, for example, are well known to be unknown. And furthermore, there's new species that come into being by evolution. There's huge arguments once you get into real experts that is actually know their field. Is speciation started with some of the tiger subspecies or not? The species itself is sort of a buzzword. So the biosphere is very old, it's evolving, it's dynamic, and it's huge. Now it's old and forever new. That's an interesting contrast. And the biosphere is perhaps older than Earth. For example, if the biosphere came here from some exploded sun, which is quite possible, because there was 10 billion years of the universe before this one started. Now, on the evolving, the evolutionary process is very deep on planet Earth. To start off with, the geosphere. Now, for the geosphere, that is the actual sphere of planet Earth, took quite a few million years. It had to incorporate all sorts of asteroids, comets, and so forth and so forth. It's still evolving, the geosphere. We get 100,000 tons a year of stardust and comets coming in. That's very rich stuff. And it comes in all the time. Now, the biosphere, there have been a number of biospheres. The first biosphere was prokaryotic. That means no nucleus-aided cell. They made a biosphere. And if you figure out how fast they breed, they could, in 24 hours, if they bred in a straight line, go all the way around the equator. So there was a prokaryotic biosphere. That prepared the ground for the eukaryotic. That is to say, cells with an actual nucleus. Then plants, animals, and fungi came more or less at the same time. You see, the fungi had to come for the plants and animals to work, otherwise who would eat up the corpses and the dead? And then the humans came. Well, you might say that geosphere to biosphere to an ethnosphere. That is, humans have never developed a human culture. Humans have developed several hundred, maybe several thousand cultures on the planet Earth, where you reproduce by meme, units of behavior, rather than by gene, units of genetics. Now, after the ethnosphere, one particular group in particular invented the next phase, which is the technosphere. That was fundamentally invented in Western Europe. The idea that your technics could go all the way around. And the Europeans invented, more or less at the same time, the sail and the cannon. So you could sail almost anywhere, and the cannon could put you in on top anywhere you went. So they produced an ethnosphere. That is, wherever you went in the world, you could find some European empire. They spoke to each other. They may have fought each other, but basically, if you would follow the French and the British and the Spanish Empire and Portuguese, you would go anywhere in the world. Well, they had Russian. Then there was the creation of the noosphere. That was discovered by Vernadsky, the guy who also created field chemistry and biospherics. And the noosphere is a sphere of intelligence. That is to say, if we look at highly intelligent people in positions that control a lot of money and power and thought, that is, in other words, people work out, say, a scientific program for 5 years, or they work out an artistic program. So that is the noosphere. And then there's a cybersphere. A cybersphere is a human body under modern conditions. Cyber means feedback. And now it is set up where the human body can basically be a total feedback engine itself. This is due to several very interesting inventions, the most interesting one being lysergic acid 25. That gets you very close to being a permanent feedback to whatever boom boom is happening. Now, of course, it doesn't mean your feedback would necessarily be very intelligent to start with, but if you're on a learning curve, you're certainly getting the feedback quick. And there's a number of other ways you can get rapid feedback. For example, you could set up camp in the middle of the fucking desert in the middle of fucking Nevada. And you got to put things together and live here. That generates intelligence. Intelligence. Gen is generate, tel is value, and in. So it means putting value, generating values in a given situation is intelligence. Okay, so that's the evolving side. The old side. Now it's a dynamic side. What we geologists call the biosphere is the rock eater. The food that we all have comes from the biosphere having eaten up rocks. And then that rocks is, for example, a fungi on a rock. So that gradually goes away, and then that's digested and upgraded by various ones of the 6 kingdoms of life. By these rock eaters. So you get to speciation. Now there's thousands and thousands of species on the planet Earth. Each one of these is a specialist at extracting a living from some part of the biosphere. Tool makers. Now that's really interesting, making tools. So suddenly, life has an extension. They have a non-organic extension that a human being can make. Then they are corporations. Corporations were invented by the British. Naturally, nearly everything was invented by the British. And that meant that you had limited liability. If you put an investment in and you went in with people, you would only lose what you put in. You wouldn't lose everything. Your house and property wouldn't be taken away, and you could unite. This was done with a very interesting drug, coffee. Coffee went into England, and around these coffee houses, they got so high, they said, oh, let's try insurance, called Lloyd's Coffee House. And Lloyd's Insurance is still there. Okay, then there's war makers. Now the military, I guess some of you have been in the military. The military, I drafted in, Korean War. Now the military has very interesting aspects on dealing with the biosphere and the planet Earth. By association, one of my favorite things was, how do you survive a tank that's coming at you? Anyway, so war has all these effects. Now, war can be actual physical war, or it can be economic war. The big economic war that put tremendous on scientific improvement of planet Earth was the war between communism and capitalism. And the Russian inventions went like this, and the American inventions went like that. Now, huge. There's 1 trillion living tons of matter. And there's upgrades. As matter dies, it's upgraded to more concentrated energy, like coal, oil, gas, soils, corals, different kinds of special rocks that are made only by humans. There's the carbonates, coal, oil, and gas. All of that is the fossils of life. Then there's the technosphere. The technosphere is everything that's technical. Techne, by the way, was the first of the 7 muses. You have to have techne, even if you're the muse of dance or the muse of theater. Everywhere, all the other muses have to have technique. They have to have techne. Okay. At this point, I would like to read Vernadsky, a forbidden writer in the United States, practically. But in fact, Biospheres is practically a forbidden subject. You can see why no capitalist system would like to study the biosphere. People might know that what they study is an ecosystem. Now, for example, say instead of studying your body, you studied under your fingernail, you could study an ecosystem. So an ecosystem means that it is verboten to study the biosphere under the present capitalist empire. The intellectuals, the PhDs, the old joke, piled higher and deeper, go off and study an ecosystem. An ecosystem could be under my fingernail, it could be the end of a block in San Diego. It's not an objective, long-lasting entity. Okay, I'm going to take just a little bit so you get a taste of a Russian thinker on the vegetable kingdom. Now remember, the vegetables, plants, and animals and fungi all came into that. Okay, here's Vernadsky. Considering the enormous potentialities for propagation inherent in living matter, the actual mass of it in the biosphere does not seem so very great. The whole mass is connected with the vegetable kingdom, which alone can catch the radiant energy of the sun. Green vegetable matter does not predominate from the point of view of actual mass, though a consideration from the point of view of dry land alone might make one think so. It is generally admitted in the ocean, animal life predominates. The structure of the mass of vegetable matter, the transformer of solar energy, is very different on land from what is in the sea. On land, the most vigorously multiplying types, such as grass, show a fairly high order of structural complexity. But in the ocean, the most prolific types are the extremely rudimentary and minute floating green cells, whose speed of transmission of life is hundreds of times greater than that of grass. In spite of the existence of large seawoods, the tiny floating cells do practically all the work of transforming the radiant energy of the sun into other forms. This is because seaweed is found only near the shore and in isolated deposits, while the entire ocean is covered with a layer of minute green cells. Moreover, on account of the preponderance of ocean over dry land on our planet, these tiny cells assume the position of the principal transformers of solar energy for the whole world. Let's go into time a little bit. So life is here for 4 billion years. I started off with these one cells. Now one cell generally lives for like minutes at the most. So for 4 billion years plus, the basic life, the non-nucleated cell, has been reproducing every few minutes. This gives you a lot of evolutionary time. Now, this is practically never studied, as far as I see, in people who talk about the environment. First place, you should never talk about the environment, you should talk about the biosphere. Because environment means what's around you, and what's around human beings is the biosphere. There's an actual name for it, it's not a weasel word like environment. Now, the prokaryotes gave way to the eukaryotes. That is to say, a cell that actually had a center, a nucleus. These two really colonized the planet for life. Then this incredible invention that came along, that animals, plants, and fungi, 3 kingdoms more or less at once came in, that were multicellular. Now the animal kingdom managed to make it all the way around the planet Earth. The great whales, to the Antarctic seals, penguins, etc. Amazing, amazing. So what did humans add to that? In the first place, we're very recent. So a full-fledged human society is only about 40,000 years old. That's the first cave painting where you see the guy, they paint the guy lying down, the shaman, and he has all the animals around him. So we know that that was an advanced human that painted that, because he's painting a very complex social structure. Now, how long that social structure was in existence before it first got painted, it could have been another 60,000 years. It could have been 30,000. And it could have been a very short time, because the rate of invention on anything new is always more or less at the max. Okay, so then there was a huge struggle for power. Which hominids were going to become humans? And also which ones actually did. There's a considerable discussion about that matter. For example, most people now study like Neanderthal. All right, there's Cro-Magnon, there's Neanderthal, and then there's modern humans. Modern humans aren't either Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal. Then there's species before that. Here's a verboten topic for discussion. How many human species are there on the planet now? That's verboten. Forbidden. It's interesting. Everybody wants to study all the things that they're supposed to study, but think of all the things that you're forbidden to study. And number one, it takes a certain amount of work to see that this is a subject that is forbidden to study. Number two, obviously it was forbidden to study because somebody in power didn't like it. Called censorship, usually. Now, Lucy, and you remember Lucy was named by this great archaeologist for Lucy in the Sky Diamonds. You needed to have very alert senses to find a little bone down there in the middle of Africa to say, oh yeah, that's a human bone. You don't just go along and say, oh yeah, that's a human bone down there. There's a little sliver. Generally it's buried, and you have to use something like acetone. That's what ruined me in archaeology. I could never get the acetone and being that careful with it, so I stayed in culturology. I just stayed long enough in it to admire archaeology. But it's very tricky. Now, nobody knows how many of these proto-species, or whether any of them were superior to us, and they disappeared because they were too superior. As Hamlet said, you can think too much. The pale cast of thought sicklies o'er the ruddy complexion. So the smartest humans may have disappeared. And in fact, exactly what humans are is a very interesting question. And how long we've been here. And is this the end, or is there possible evolution beyond that? In effect, if you look at the high-tech stuff, well, so let's take Burning Man, for example. Now this is, what I love about Burning Man is it's super high-tech, and it looks like it's just a country party. But any of you know anything about military logistics or anything can see that this is extremely sophisticated engineering. That's why we can survive out here in the desert. Now there's all sorts of other very sophisticated, worldly wise sophisticated, several other worldly wise methods of adapting to here and there. So it could be some people have said, well, maybe physical evolution of humans is over, but not their technological evolution. In other words, if you had permanent evolution in terms of something, say, you could walk around with, or just altered brain cells. Oh, yeah, please, I want 8 more IQ points. Oh, yeah, oh, in that region there. Now, another interesting thing is who actually uses advanced medicine? Now, if you read American propaganda in the newspapers, it's generally somebody who's suffering and they're saved at the last minute by some gigantic new device of medicine. They never have a story about anybody who is perfectly healthy using advanced medicine to become smarter. Well, of course, here, obviously, a lot of people use medicine to become smarter, right? Like LSD or ecstasy or something. And there are other ways to become smarter. That is, by actual measurement. There are other ways to become more empathic. That is, not only can we increase our thinking brain capacity, but we can increase the emotional capacity. These are separate brains inside. A thinking brain generally is only the associative level. There's the emotional brain. There's the sensual brain. A real knockout punch is to the belly. Boom. Because your entire moving center gets paralyzed. Then there's the moving center. Now the moving center is interesting. That operates really off the basis of the spine. That's why in the Army or places like that they say, get your fucking ass in gear. You get down to the spine. See, off that spine, you do all kinds of things. Because that controls the movement. Then there's sex center. And sex center is like creative energy. So it may or may not be used in what most people ordinarily call sexual. It could be used in any kind of creative endeavor. So these humans, us humans, this invention of different languages, it's really quite something. There's hundreds of different languages. Now, which languages do you learn? Well, some people say, oh, well, I learn English and Chinese, or English and French, or sometimes people 3 or 4 languages. But there's hundreds of languages. And furthermore, there's languages which are not recognized by anthropologists. That is, languages within a profession. Joe says to Jack, hey man, that's cool. Well, it depends on who Jack is and who Joe is, what cool means. At least 7 different levels. You're quote in when you understand which of the 7 levels somebody is referring to with the slang. And it's impenetrable, obviously, to the fucking bourgeois. I mean, did I say that to the bourgeois? I mean, to the middle class. I mean, to the people think money is the end-all and be-all. Now, all of knowledge is basically verboten. All of knowledge is basically forbidden. Now, you can get special knowledge. For example, I had special knowledge at one point about the uranium industry. But you had to sign a secret deal. There's all kinds of things like that that exist today. And in fact, it's very hard to tell whether anybody you're talking to, I go back when people still spoke English. It's very hard to know your ass from a hole in the ground when you get into complex situations at night. Night means subconscious. When you get in situations that are very difficult for your subconscious, it's extremely difficult to apply categories that were made for the conscious mind. Now, according to people like Mr. Freud and Mr. Reich, the subconscious is at least 90%, and the conscious is just a tiny little island on top of that. So we could say that we're in a very desperate situation, we humans. And I don't mean collective humans. I mean, we as individual humans are in very desperate straits to understand anything that's going on. We don't live very long. We don't spend very much of that time thinking. We don't spend very much of that time actually in pure emotion. We don't spend very much of that time in actually pure instinct, that is actually feeling, smelling, posture, all of that stuff. And we certainly don't spend very much time in all of the various sensations. For example, if you're a good American, you've been told that there are 5 senses. Now, the standard of American education is that I've never heard anybody publicly refute that in the United States. Occasionally, in esoteric writing, you'll say, oh, Daniel Boone really survived. You know what? He had a 6th sense. That's 13 altogether, by the way. I mean, it can be identified. And so ignorance is always a good place to start from. I noticed today in America, people want to start off with what they know. Oh, what do you know about that? Oh, you know that. You got a degree in that. You passed in that. Well, tell me what you know. It's the cultural deal that you never ask somebody what they don't know. That's insulting because everybody is supposed to know. So you see, how do you know an American? Well, because they know so much. They think they know so much. They feel they know so much. They're conditioned to say they know so much. Actually, all of us are in a field of gigantic ignorance. Socrates maintained that that was the beginning of wisdom, was to realize that I'm ignorant. Now, if I'm ignorant, I only have one way direction to go. That's to learn something or not. And then what's to learn? Well, what I was taught was, fortunately, my family were old pioneer family, was you should start thinking when you're in something so fucking difficult that your automatically trained moving center can't solve it. If I can handle it anyway, instinctively, then I know it. That is, it knows it. And if it knows that much, generally I get interested in it. Now, the biggest ignorance is biosphere. Biosphere is systematically destroyed in the United States. Like Biosphere 2, for example. It was actually shut down by a SWAT squad. You never read why it was shut down. That's because I had to sign a fucking piece of paper. But why it was shut down was the SWAT squad landed in. The SWAT squad, that's, to wipe out drug dealers. And then the biosphere it was eliminated as a subject of thought, environment. And what was substituted for the titillation of the intellectual masses was global warming. Well, what is warming, number one? The biosphere. If it is. If you're a geologist, you can go back and see that, in fact, there's been global warmings before that were real global warmings. All the ice melted. All of it. So nobody's predicting that yet. So all those things depend on what you mean. But what global warming did do was it made the American intelligentsia line up about global warming. I would say step one, would really be understand that we live in a biosphere, that this biosphere is extremely big. That it's had over 4 billion years to develop an intelligence. And instead of inflicting new kinds of techniques on it, why not learn some real techniques? I call it eco-techniques, the techniques by which the biosphere produces this incredible nesting of ecosystems that work together to increase free energy rather than cutting free energy down. Oh. Oh, she wanted me to read something. Anybody? Oh, okay.
This is from John's memoir, Me and the Biospheres, his My Dream.
So this ended this book, Me and the Biosphere. My dream. 20 years from now, every country will have their own biosphere. Each biosphere will reflect the biomes in that country. For example, China would have a rainforest based on Yunnan, a coral reef from the China Sea, grasslands from the north, deserts from Mongolia, a marsh from the coast, and agriculture from each of its various farmlands, and a human habitat representing the ultimate Shanghai or Beijing communication, technical theater, cuisine, research layout. The same would be true for Great Britain, France, Russia, United States, Australia, Brazil, and all the others. These biospheres will be open to public view. There are scientific papers available to all. Those who manage the biosphere and those working in its supporting research centers will form a school producing practical graduates who understand the biosphere. They constitute a cadre to work within governments, corporations, nonprofit organizations, and popular movements to ensure that human progress makes a synergy with Earth's biosphere. Some of these graduates will become members of the core groups working to understand possibilities for biospheres on Mars, Moon, and in space. This work will contribute immensely to understanding the glorious uniqueness of our planet Earth, at least in this solar system. These biospheres will demonstrate the ways that technosphere and ethnosphere work together with biosphere. From that comprehensive knowledge, a noosphere, a sphere of intelligence that unifies art, science, and humanity, will emerge on planet Earth. These biospheres will be open to all, not special preserves for elites to create new bureaucracies. Farms, parks, cities, universities, and wilderness reserves will reframe their ways to cooperate with and enhance our home, Earth's biosphere, with a new vision of a beneficial and profitable technosphere. They will act as cooperative agents of emergent evolution with a new understanding of ethnosphere, create a co-evolving system of cultures that upgrade their soils, flora, fauna, and human senses and imagination.
Johnny, thank you very much. Before you go, would you like to take a few questions? Just so you know, this is actually John's science fiction novel. It takes place 15,000 years in the future, 15,000 light years away, far away. Didn't get to that. John's going to take a Yeah, he'll take a few questions, and also, just so you know, there's some cards up here. John's giving a talk also over at Daniel's camp on Friday on the ethnosphere, the sphere of cultures around the planet. There's cards up here, and also his books and publications. Help yourself to that. Johnny, would you take a few questions? Okay.
Do you believe in collective consciousness? That the subconscious knows everything?
Do you believe in collective consciousness?
I believe in the collective unconscious, yeah.
Daniel?
I was very interested in your comment about LSD 25 somehow being part of this development of this kind of cybernetic feedback loop mechanism, but I wasn't sure that I totally understood it. Can you just explain a little deeper how you see the importance of LSD, you know, in you know, this human evolution process, you know?
Well, Albert and I were pretty good friends. I wrote him one time, we're doing this corporate stuff and we're really in a mess. It's your ecology and so forth and so forth. What do you suggest, Albert? Special delivery, 7 sugar cubes, 200 mics apiece, and we solved that problem. It's like any other advanced piece of technology. You know, if you use it for what it's designed for, it's the best in the field, I think. Although the ingredients of ayahuasca are, there's a number of close competitors, let's say. But LSD is is modern chemistry. So you just get it direct. To actually make ayahuasca, you have to work really hard at it. It doesn't just appear. So I think every consciousness-changing substance was developed by some intelligent group of people, and I've been fortunate enough to travel to practically all of those groups, and boy, the difference between the shaman or whoever it is that knows how to utilize that and other people is noticeable. Let's say Burning Man is noticeable, for example. and I really like this because I think somewhere we have to recover the tribe. The tribe was the most intelligent human invention that was ever made. And the tribe is composed of at least 2 clans. So the tribe is not so simple. Clans were the first invention. And then tribes were made as clan. Now this is going to be very interesting, like for us people in the so-called modern conditions, because the old clans were based on blood, genes, and the new clans have to be based on memes. So your DNA would have to be like a installed DNA, a given thought system.
Do you mean that you can create this through meditation, evolution of DNA?
Evolution of DNA through meditation, possible?
Well, you see, there's 3 stages: concentration, meditation, and contemplation. And we need more of all 3 of them.
Okay, are there any other questions?
So since you believe that there's a collective unconscious, do you believe that you can have unrestricted access to it?
Do you think that there is unrestricted access to the collective unconscious?
What?
Unrestricted access to the collective unconscious? With intention.
I think it depends on your culture. So the collective unconscious, for example, of a Lakota Indian is different than the collective consciousness of a French culture. But I think, yeah, you can contact that. Any good shaman does that.
What if you have many teachers, then would you have access to more collective unconsciousnesses?
I just want to make sure I get it exactly right.
Yeah. If you have many teachers, could you have access to different types of unconsciousness?
Well, there's 7 different levels of consciousness that's been identified in long-lasting traditions. And of course, each of those levels has, you might say, sub-levels. So one of the big things that screws Americans up and a lot of Europeans is they say, are you conscious or unconscious? Nearly everything is made into a dyad. So more complex systems, which have 3 independent units, 4, 5, 6, or 7, are almost untouchable by somebody who's really addicted to the either-or mode. Although either-or is certainly better than this is this.
Sorry, listen, we only have a little bit of time, so we're going to pass it around. You have a question?
Yeah, quick question, and then I'll pass it on. The Biosphere is in a really special place on the planet, the Biosphere 2 in southern Arizona, there where the the bufo toad lives. I know you said you've worked with the LSD-25. Have you worked with the 5-MeO-DMT from the bufo toad? First part. And second part, you mentioned the 13 senses. We know of the 5 senses. Could you tell us the rest of the 13?
Okay, I can safely say that there's something to do with the blue what toad?
Yeah, the bufo alvarez toad that lives in the Sonoran Desert there in the Catalinas near the Biosphere 2. Have you worked with the DMT from the glands of the toad?
No, we haven't particularly worked with that thing, but he's interested in the 13 levels of the 13 senses that you mentioned earlier. If you could elucidate on the 13 senses.
Well, to give you, for example, there's the 5, and I'll just give one other example called sense of balance.
Sense of balance.
So if you don't have a sense of balance, there's a lot of things you can't.
Sense of balance.
Each one of them is independent like that. But it's part of the conditioning, what used to be called Western man.
Nobody can hear you.
Notice leaving out women. Western man was a truncated man. This all started in an era called French rationalism, where you could define everything and you simplify.
So the sense of balance is one of those. Perhaps we might have a chat with him afterwards and he can go through all 13 because there's a few of them. Daniel, did you have another question? Okay. Anybody else?
I was just wondering if you felt comfortable telling us about how the SWAT team stopped your studies in more detail.
Okay, the SWAT team. It was really just brought in. It was an exercise in a corporate dispute that was resolved, and the SWAT team was not the end-all and be-all. They just came in as backup. But basically, there was a corporate disagreement about the future of the project, and it went into a different direction, and the corporation was dissolved. He's asking about the breakup of Biosphere 2, if you want to elucidate on that just a bit.
Biosphere 2 was built as a cooperation of USSR and USA science, with some help from the British Royal Society. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the American ruling class figured that meant that they had carte blanche to run the world. Biosphere 2 was built, I had a group of scientists that included the Soviets, the Americans, the French, the British, and some tribal groups. So what that meant was that those rulers of the American capitalist class who find it inconvenient to acknowledge that there's a biosphere used the fall of Russia to eliminate everything they could around the planet that had to do with biospheric study, and eliminate a lot of other things too. Had the Russian Empire continued as the American Empire continued, we had a lot of talks about this, that very probably the American Empire would not allow Biosphere 2 to last very long. So we had it all worked out to put it in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union collapsed. As the Soviet Union collapsed, the American right wing took that as the belief that this showed the superiority of American culture, go all the way, we don't need any deviance, anything else, we just move straight ahead. Opposition is gone. Now Biosphere is not something that if you were a full hardcore capitalist that you could be very interested in, because there would be all sorts of things you couldn't do. There would be all sorts of things you could do, but a lot of things, openly polluting stuff, obviously you couldn't do, or even wouldn't do if you had a biospheric education. So behind that was not just Biosphere 2, it was the entire change of policy that occurred in the United States when the Soviet Union collapsed. This is hardly ever dealt with. The Soviet Union was so balanced that either everything they did was critiqued by the United States and everything we did was critiqued by them. So when they collapsed, there were no more critiques left external to the United States. And they took full advantage of that to eliminate any critiques inside. Now, a biospheric approach is, if you look in practical terms, is a critique of capitalist economy. If life becomes your number one goal, then capital can't be. That doesn't mean you're against capital. I'm a semi-capitalist myself, but a capitalist within, you know, some kind of useful limits. And so that was part of this total crackdown. It was led by Columbia University. Now, since some of you actually seem to be interested in esoteric America, an Ivy League like Harvard or whatever will hardly take directly the orders from the Pentagon. Columbia University will. Now, you say, where's the evidence of that? The submarine that picked up the Soviet submarines that sank was Columbia University submarine. They did a lot of stuff that required a university in the Cold War was done by Columbia University. Columbia University was the one selected to take over and destroy the biosphere part of Biosphere 2. And the same guy that did that was sent down there from Harvard, an economist. He's also the guy that gave the advice to the Russians that practically destroyed Russia. Namely, he said, okay, you're going to capitalism. They said, how can we do that? How can we do that? You're advanced America. Oh, you're from Harvard, blah, 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 blah. He said, give a share to every worker. That's how they get all these Russian billionaires, because the worker gets this little share, right? It means nothing. So they picked up all these little shares, and then you had the new class of Russian billionaires suddenly emerge like that, boom, which suited the United States policy perfectly.
Okay, there's one more question, John.
John, you talked about the importance of the biosphere, and that would really be the place to start to understand an intelligent understanding of what is going on. Where would you have some individual who wanted to pursue that intelligence begin?
There's always Biosphere 1. That's the one we're in. So actually, I would say study the data from Biosphere 2, study Bernadsky, and start applying that to this biosphere. Now, I think we do need another model, and if things work out, we'll do, because you can study things with a model, you can't study with reality. But for example, practice looking at planet Earth as a biosphere, and you'll find so many things will clear up for you. And it's got to be a biosphere because that's the definition of the biosphere. That's why we call it Biosphere 2 down there. But this isn't just Biosphere 1. If we're being technically evolutionary, this is Biosphere 7. Because first one, remember, was non-nucleated bugs. The second one was nucleated bugs. And each of these biospheres it built soil, it built atmosphere, it built changes, so that the next new biosphere that came in could be a different order of complexity.
Okay. Pez, thank you so much for having us here today. Thank you all for being here.